21 years ago, Sanjeev Gadhia founded Astral Aviation. While passenger air transport had picked up pace in the country and the region at the time, there was a big gap in cargo transport by air.
What we were doing before we started the aviation business is we were doing a lot of work for the UN. And I don't know if you remember, there were a lot of problems in Somalia, in Rwanda, in Sudan. There was no South Sudan or North Sudan, it was just one Sudan. So what we realized is that whenever there was cargo that had to be transported to some of the countries who were our neighbors, there were no aircrafts which were in the region. So aircrafts had to come from Dubai, aircrafts had to come from Europe to pick up cargo in Nairobi and take it to Mogadishu, for example. So what we realized is that there is a unique opportunity over here that if we had the right aircrafts at our Nairobi hub, that we would actually be able to access some of the regional markets a lot more quicker.
One by one, Sanjeev began reaching out to potential clients, including the United Nations. Astral began flying essential goods to regions that were in dire need of humanitarian assistance. This way, the business began growing. Astral equally onboarded commercial cargoes such as perishable and heavy machinery.
Other customers started approaching us. So we had the customers who actually approached us to transport mining equipment to Tanzania. And then we were bringing in Nile perch fish fillets from various airports along the Lake Victoria, like we were looking at Mwanza and Kisumu, and we were transporting it to various airports such as Nairobi and Mombasa. And I really believe that we've done some amazing things. We've transported hundreds and thousands of tons of cargo, whether it is food for the UN peacekeepers, whether it is flowers from Kenya to Europe, whether it is humanitarian cargo, including vaccines.
But in December 2019, a new virus broke out in China. Just like everyone, Sanjeev thought the virus would be contained in China, as was the case with SARS virus in 2003 and 2004. That was not the case. In less than 3 months, the coronavirus was declared a global pandemic, putting a sudden halt to movement of people and goods.
It was a very big shift because we've been transporting flowers from Nairobi to London for the last 8 years. And also into Europe. So suddenly we started noticing that our flower shipments were actually reducing. A lot of cancellations took place because in Europe people were not interested in buying flowers anymore. And if you remember, what happened in Kenya was that in 2020 we lost 70% as a country of our flower market. And that is huge. I'm talking about 50,000 people who worked in the agricultural sector who are made homeless. They actually lost their jobs. So this was a very serious problem that we as a country faced. And even as an airline, we also faced a very, very big problem because we just didn't have the flowers anymore.
As the number of COVID-19 infections and fatalities grew, Sanjeev knew the survival of his business depended on how fast the airline would shift focus to the changing needs brought about by the pandemic.
We started focusing on avocados, we started focusing on fresh fruits and vegetables, and we started giving more capacity. So typically on a 747, you carry about 70% flowers and 30% veg. So we immediately increased the capacity for fresh fruits and vegetables from 30% to 80%, so they could actually be able to transport more. And we were very lucky because as Europeans who are staying at home, they were actually consuming more fresh foods, and the demand for fresh foods started going up. So we were so fortunate that our clients were able to supply us with enough fresh fruits and vegetables for the European market. And what was also very interesting is that we made sure that the shelves in the supermarkets with Kenyan fruits and vegetables were never empty.
With passenger planes grounded world over, demand for cargo aviation was on a steady rise. Sanjeev says Astral began getting more orders and traversing new routes. Further, a new opportunity outside the traditional agri-products presented itself in pharmaceuticals. Essential goods such as personal protective equipment, testing kits, and reagents were in high demand.
So we suddenly started getting new loads for South Africa, and we're very grateful to DHL, who contracted us to perform up to 6 flights a week from Nairobi to Johannesburg with cargo which traditionally moved on passenger aircrafts. So what we saw was that our strategy to operate flights continued very well because we started noticing that our volumes were actually increasing. And instead of saying no, and remember, we don't believe in saying no, we always say yes. We started getting in more aircrafts, we started flying more, and we were also very fortunate that we also started receiving a lot of PPEs, the face masks that you're wearing right now, ventilators, oxygen concentrators started coming in very large numbers because there were no face masks that were available in a lot of places in Africa in March, April, May. If you remember, the prices of face masks were so expensive. So what was actually happening is that face masks were coming in from China by air, and we had a responsibility to distribute it all over Africa. So we were very fortunate that we transported PPEs to almost 42 countries in Africa.
As cases and fatalities rose and business slowed down to near closure, the race for a vaccine got onto the fast track. Pfizer and BioNTech emerged in November 2020 as the first firms to roll out vaccines that were 90% effective. Shortly after, many more vaccines such as Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson got regulatory approval for emergency use in the US and Europe. And when the time came to distribute the vaccine across the African continent, UNICEF shortlisted Astral Aviation among 14 other airlines to transport the vaccine across the continent.
So in terms of fleet, we have 14 aircrafts which are available for the transportation of vaccines. Our biggest aircraft, which is a 747, can be able to transport up to 50 million doses of vaccines. The 767, which is something that you can actually see over here in this model, can carry 25 million doses of vaccines. So we have aircrafts which can transport from 1 million doses of vaccines right up to 50 million doses of vaccines. So we have the fleet. We've actually been doing vaccines for the last 15 years, and we've actually built a very good strategy. We give, first of all, a very high priority for the transportation of vaccines. We are ready to delay a flight, but the vaccines have to travel on time. The reason being that there are people who are waiting at the airport, waiting for the vaccines to arrive, and there's a complete chain which takes place from the time a plane arrives with the vaccines. So we give it a very high priority. We have special people in Astral who are trained to transport vaccines. And above all, we've also got certain systems in place which provides the level of confidence, provides visibility to the clients so that they know what time the aircraft is taken off, what time it's landed, what are the temperatures on board the aircraft. So we take the vaccine business very seriously.
While a majority of airlines are fighting so hard to survive the pandemic, Astral Aviation says it has been cash positive.
We did not lay off a single staff member. We continued with all the staff, and on the contrary, we actually took on more staff. We've actually grown our company by an additional 20%. We've actually had more pilots who have actually joined us. We've also been advertising in the Nation and in the Standard to actually make sure that people see our adverts, because last year was the toughest year for the aviation industry. You had 90% of the aircrafts which were grounded. You had 50,000 pilots all over the world who were jobless. And here we were as a company who were actually recruiting pilots. So it was a great opportunity. And we always made sure that we give priority to Kenyans. So all the pilots that we recruited during the pandemic for our 767 are all pilots from Kenya.
The International Air Transport Association says the pace of recovery in air cargo volumes accelerated slightly in September 2020. However, industry-wide cargo ton kilometers (CTKs) contracted by 8% year-on-year as at September, a slight improvement on 12.1% decline in August 2020. While global demand fell, African air carriers reported year-on-year increase in demand by 9.7% year-on-year in September 2020. It was the fifth consecutive month in which Africa posted the strongest increase in international demand. Demand was driven by investment flows along the Africa-Asia route. However, intercontinental cargo capacity for shipments between Africa and other parts of the world decreased by 24.9%. With these numbers at the back of his head, Sanjeev has his focus for 2021 razor sharp.
I really believe that in 2021 and in the first half of 2022, our priority would be to make sure that we transport the vaccines to and within Africa. But the second thing, which is also very important, is to make sure that the rest of the flights are also operating. So with our Boeing 767, we just started our new service from Nairobi to Sharjah, which is our Middle Eastern hub. So we are transporting perishables twice a week to the Middle East. And we're also expanding some of our networks, like for example, our flight to Johannesburg, as we've actually doubled the capacity. So what we are doing is we are approaching we're taking a very cautious strategy where we have to make sure that we are able to continue to operate not only for the vaccines but for our existing flights. But there's so many other things that we also do. We transport food for the UN peacekeepers in Somalia. We have to make sure that those flights are also operating on time. And also the needs of some of our other customers. We also transport election materials. This is something that we have to also continue doing. And in addition to that, we will also be transporting a lot of oil and gas cargo, for example, in Mozambique. So we really need to make sure that we can be able to manage in a very cautious and in a very positive manner so that we can actually be able to see 2021 through. I'm really excited because every day brings a lot of challenges and we have to make sure that we adopt to it, and we also make sure that we continue to be operating in a very safe environment, because we've actually got our numbers which are going up, which we've actually been noticing. So there could be a possibility that we might have to again have a situation where some of us might be operating from home. We just have to be ready for it. It could even be tomorrow, it could even be next week. So we just have to make sure that that flexibility is something that we are ready to work with during difficult times.